Canada's population is contracting, a sharp contrast from just 2 years ago, when the country saw its fastest growth since 1957.
The overall number fell by roughly 76,000 people over the third quarter because of changes to immigration. It's a big adjustment and one that will have a direct impact on our country's economic future.
December 17th, 2025. Statistics Canada released preliminary Q3 demographic estimates showing Canada's population decreased by 76,068 people, a 0.2% decline between July 1 and October 1. This is the first quarterly population decline outside the pandemic in more than half a century. The last time Canada reported a quarterly decline was around the end of 2020 during COVID border restrictions. Other than during COVID-19, Canada has never reported a quarter-to-quarter reduction in population levels. Outside of the pandemic drop, this is the first time Canada's population has declined in at least the past 8 decades, based on historical data from 1946. 80 decades. Canada's population has grown every single quarter for 80 years, until now. This is happening right now. December 2025. And as we close out this year, Canada faces a demographic crisis that will reshape everything. Housing markets, labor markets, universities, government revenues, and the entire economy. Because when your population shrinks for the first time in living memory, nothing stays the same. I'm going to break down exactly what's happening. The massive drop in temporary residents. The provinces hit hardest. The policy changes driving the decline, the economic consequences. Because this isn't just a statistic, this is a fundamental transformation of Canada's growth model. But first, if you want to understand what's really happening to Canada's economy and demographics without the government spin, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that subscribe button right now. Your subscription helps us expose the truth about Canada's population crisis. All right, let's get into the numbers. Canada's population stood at 41,575,585 on October 1st, 2025, down from 41,651,653 on July 1st. That's 76,068 fewer people in just 3 months. The reduction in non-permanent residents was 176,479 in Q3 2025, the largest decrease since comparable records began in Q3 1971. That's a 54-year record. This drop surpassed the decreases in Q2, 58,719, and Q1, 55,194 of 2025. So Canada's population has been declining all year. It's just accelerating. Q1, down 55,000. Q2, down 59,000. Q3, down 176,000. The trend is getting worse, not better. Statistics Canada states the population decrease was mainly due to a drop in non-permanent residents, the result of changing government policies concerning international migration. Now let's compare this to recent history, because the whiplash is stunning. In Q3 2023, Canada recorded its highest quarterly population growth rate since Q2 1957 at 1.0%, adding 418,634 people. In Q3 2024, the population increased by 231,803 people, 0.6%. From plus 418,000 in Q3 2023 to 76,000 in Q3 2025. That's a 494,000 person swing in 2 years. Canada went from the fastest growth since 1957 to the first decline since the 1940s. On October 1st, 2025, there were about 2.85 million non-permanent residents in Canada, accounting for 6.8% of the total population. On July 1st, there were about 3 million, 7.3%. A record high 339,505 temporary permits expired in Q3, while only 163,026 were issued. More than twice as many permits expired as were issued. That's not a policy adjustment. That's a demographic collapse. Now let's talk about which provinces got hit hardest. Ontario saw a 0.4% population decrease, and British Columbia saw 0.3%, the largest population decreases in Q3 2025. Both provinces saw their first annual population declines on record. First annual population decline on record. Ontario and BC, Canada's 2 largest provincial economies, have never experienced annual population decline in recorded history, until now. Manitoba and Northwest Territories both saw 0.2% declines. Every province and territory except Alberta and Nunavut, both plus 0.2%, saw population decreases. While Alberta's growth remained positive, it was the lowest for this province since Q2 2021, plus 0.1%, when COVID border restrictions were still in place. Even Alberta, the one province still growing, saw its slowest growth in 4 years. Now let's break down exactly who's leaving. The reduction in study permit holders only was concentrated in Ontario, 47,511, and British Columbia, 14,991, which have the highest numbers of study permit holders. Statistics Canada data showed roughly 73,000 fewer study permit holders in Q3 2025. International students, gone. That's 73,000 students who were paying full tuition, renting apartments, buying groceries, using transit, all gone in one quarter. The number of asylum claimants, protected persons, and related groups increased by 7,324 in Q3 2025, reaching a record high of 504,167. Nevertheless, the increase was the smallest since Q1 2022, 5,675. So asylum claims keep rising, but at a slower pace. Meanwhile, legal temporary residents are leaving in record numbers. Now let's talk about the policy changes driving this collapse. The federal government has implemented multiple changes to advance its objective of reducing temporary residents to 5% of Canada's population by the end of 2027. That number now stands at 6.8% compared to 7.3% in the previous quarter. Here are the specific policy changes. Moratorium on low-wage LMIAs. Low-wage LMIAs submitted after September 26, 2024 are no longer processed in regions with unemployment of 6% or higher. Without an LMIA, employers cannot hire new workers or renew existing work permits under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. Restricted eligibility for spousal open work permits, now limited to spouses of select international students and skilled foreign workers. Cap on study permit applications. Study permits were capped at 550,162 for 2025, with only 437,000 permits issued, a 10% reduction from 2024. And it's getting worse. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada said it would limit total permits to 408,000 in 2026. That includes 155,000 new permits and 253,000 extensions. That's 7% lower compared to 437,000 in 2025 and 16% lower compared to 485,000 in 2024. From 485,000 in 2024 to 408,000 in 2026. That's a 16% cut in 2 years. In March 2024, then Immigration Minister Mark Miller said Canada had become addicted to temporary workers. That's the government's official position. Canada was addicted to the workers filling job vacancies. Now let's talk about the economic consequences, because population decline doesn't just affect demographics, it affects everything. LJ Valencia, economist with Desjardins Group, predicted the drop in non-permanent residents will boost Canada's real GDP per capita after declining growth in 2023 and 2024 from immigration. That sounds good, right? GDP per capita improving? But here's the catch. However, weaker population growth is also poised to act as a drag on the broader economy. This will add to existing headwinds, from trade policy uncertainty to the mortgage renewal cycle, which are expected to weigh on near-term growth and the minds of central bankers. So GDP per capita might improve, but total GDP will shrink. Economic growth will slow. Tax revenues will fall. Economists say the reversal may help improve per capita GDP in the near term, but warn of possible labor supply gaps in hospitality, agriculture, and construction if the trend continues. Labor shortages. The exact problem Canada had before opening the temporary resident floodgates in 2021-2023. Now let's talk about housing, because this is where it gets really complicated. Housing market analysts note that lower population growth could ease rental demand in overheated markets such as Toronto and Vancouver, but may hurt provincial revenue forecasts tied to consumption taxes. Lower rental demand sounds good if you're trying to find an affordable apartment, but it's catastrophic if you're a landlord with vacancies, a developer with unsold condos, a municipality that depends on development fees, a province that relies on consumption tax revenue. Michael Hahn, sociology professor and demographer at Western University, said, "At any point in time, we had over 2 million non-permanent residents on the ground in Canada. That's a fairly large number for a population of just 41 million. Hahn says managing Canada's immigration is a delicate dance. I struggle with it a little bit. One of the things that there doesn't seem to be any huge consensus on is what our perfect immigration levels should be. Translation? Nobody knows what they're doing. Canada swung from massive population growth to population decline in 2 years, and policymakers are making it up as they go. Now let's talk about universities, because they're about to get devastated. Universities that rely on international tuition revenue are already forecasting budget shortfalls for 2026. International students pay 3 to 5 times what domestic students pay. With 73,000 fewer study permit holders in Q3 alone, and caps dropping from 437,000 in 2025 to 408,000 in 2026, universities are losing billions in tuition revenue. Expect program cuts, faculty layoffs, campus closures, because Canadian universities built their budgets on international student tuition, and that money just evaporated. Now let's talk about the government's contradictory messaging. While temporary immigration was the primary reason for the drop in total population, this was partly offset by permanent immigration. Canada welcomed 102,867 immigrants in Q3 2025, similar to quarterly increases seen since Q4 2024, in line with meeting IRCC's 2025-2027 immigration levels plan. So permanent immigration continues at planned levels while temporary immigration collapses. The government wants permanent residents but not temporary workers or students. But here's the problem. Growth was almost exclusively driven by international migration, which constituted 97.3% of growth in 2024. With Canada now experiencing ultra-low fertility, the low level of natural increase, 117,600 in Q3 2025, was more than offset by losses from international migration, 93,668. Canada's birth rate can't sustain population growth, only immigration can. But the government is deliberately shrinking immigration, so Canada's population will keep declining. Here's the bottom line as we close out 2025. Canada's population decreased by 76,068 in Q3 2025, first decline outside pandemic in 80 years. Non-permanent residents dropped by 176,479, largest decrease since records began in 1971. Ontario and BC saw first annual population declines on record. 73,000 fewer study permit holders. 339,505 permits expired versus 163,026 issued. 2026 study permit cap, 408,000, down 16% from 2024. Government target, reduce temporary residents to 5% of population by end of 2027. Natural increase only 117,600 cannot offset migration losses. Canada's population will continue declining through 2026 and likely 2027. This isn't a one-quarter anomaly. This is the new normal. Make sure you're subscribed because the economic consequences of population decline will dominate 2026. Universities cutting budgets, rental markets softening, labor shortages returning, tax revenues falling, economic growth slowing. Canada spent 2021-2023 adding people at the fastest rate since 1957. Now it's losing people at the fastest rate since records began. That whiplash will break things. Housing developers built for population growth. Universities budgeted for international students. Governments projected revenues based on consumption. Employers planned for available workers. All those assumptions just died. The population decline crisis isn't coming. It's already here. And nobody's ready for what comes next. This story is far from over. 2026 will be the year Canada learns what happens when you go from explosive growth to sudden decline. Stay tuned.